Well, hey, everybody, it's just Steve here again, and I have found yet another interesting person to hang out with today. His name is Luke Soderling, and I'm just super excited to chat with him. I think he's a super interesting dude. So let's start welcoming in Luke. Where are you calling in from, Luke?
Hey, thanks for having me on here. I'm from northern Minnesota. It's snowing outside here right now, and we're hoping for spring, but we're getting more snow. So
I love that. And I'm a Minnesota guy too. And you're actually the first guest I've had that's from Minnesota. Everybody's from somewhere else. So I'm excited to connect with a Minnesota guy.
Hey, there you go.
We can do our Skull chant in the background.
There you go. Exactly. Right. Go Vikings.
Right. Now, are you a longtime Minnesota guy? Are you a transplant?
No, I grew up here. So I've been here my entire life.
Love it.
Grew up here on the Iron Range. And, there's nothing stranger than a ranger.
Nice. Love it. Well, let's set the context here first before we kind of dig into, insights for life or wherever this conversation goes. The reason I had you on, I just think you have this interesting, compelling story. And let's just kind of paint the picture for folks of who you are a little bit. So maybe touch a little bit on the Discovery's The Wheel. What's that deal?
Yeah, so the Discovery Channel put on this show that they've never done before. And they took 6 people from 6 different walks of life that had no survival experience at all. We've never done anything like this before. I had some basic background in camping and hunting and fishing, things like that. Growing up in northern Minnesota, it's kind of cheating a little bit. But then they went and they took us and they dropped us off in 6 different places around South America. And then they left us there. We had to film ourselves. We had to find all our own food, our own water, our own shelter, everything for 60 days in 6 different places. You never knew when, but the wheel would turn and this beacon would go off at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And this bright light and this sound would wake you up. The crew would show up and they'd say, you have 20 minutes, pack your stuff. And then they'd haul you off to the next location. So in the dark, I was on my hands and knees feeling around, trying to find stuff. I had no flashlight. If I was lucky, I had a fire going. And I'd pack up all the gear and haul it off to the next spot. And then they drop me off again and say, good luck. We'll see you later.
And you signed up for this knowing full well that was the deal.
Yeah, exactly. My mom was kind of concerned. She's kind of like, why? What on earth are you doing? Didn't I raise you better than this?
Right. You have Minnesota wisdom.
Right, exactly. And she also said that if I die out there, she'll kill me. So I was armed with that threat, in the back of my mind. I went off into the unknown.
Oh man, so I definitely want to explore that a little bit further as we get into the conversation. But I want to continue to kind of paint the picture of your whole story. There's also a piece of your story that is a cancer survivor.
Yeah, that's right. So in 2013, I was at my parents. Again, my mother was the one that was the hero of this story. And we're 4th of July. I was at dinner and I leaned over the table to kind of reach for something. Somebody's passing something. And she said, what's that on your neck? And I said, what lump? And I felt around and sure enough, there's a big lump on my neck. I'd never noticed before. And I went to the hospital and the doctor arranged for a biopsy and an ultrasound. They said, we need to get this done right away. And after the ultrasound, they determined that it was a 2.5-inch tumor on the side of my neck.
Wow.
And the biopsy they took came back a few days later. The doctor called and left a message on my phone. And I called him back and they're standing in the middle of my driveway on a Saturday afternoon. He told me that I had stage 3 thyroid cancer. And it was devastating. That's, you don't expect to get cancer. I never saw it coming. And you just don't know what life is going to bring. You're so tied to everything that you're working on and you're dealing with, and you're, so wrapped up in that when you throw a big monkey wrench in everything, it just throws everything for a huge loop. And I'll tell you, it makes you evaluate your priorities, and it really puts a new perspective on everything. Tucking your kids in at night is a completely different experience when you're dealing with cancer and you don't know if you're going to be for them when they need you later on in life.
Now, you're a pretty young guy. How old were you in 2013?
So I was 33 at that point. And yeah, it was, I was not expecting that, at all. I talked to friends about it and they said, that can't be right. You have to
Right.
get a second opinion, and stuff. And there was no question about it. I was healthy. I had no other type of medical issues or problems at all. And, just came out of the blue.
Yeah. And so what's the timing of that compared to when you went on the wheel?
So I went through the whole cancer treatment process, and that was about a 8-month process. And then a few years later, in 2016, I got an email for a show called The Wheel,
Hmm.
and they said survive in the wilderness for 60 days with minimal equipment. And I thought, what's not to love? I mean, it sounds like a blast. Who wouldn't want to do that,
Right.
right?
Well, was that part of your story? Was that part of going on the wheel as a cancer survivor, or was these just completely independent things?
No, it was definitely the main reason why they chose me, is
Okay.
that they wanted to have that character as a father, as a husband, as a cancer survivor. That every one of us that was on the show had a very unique story, something that's what was driving us. There's a lot of shows out there that have a grand prize or money, or like Survivor, you win $1 million, or
Yeah.
some of these other things, and anybody will stay out and do amazingly crazy things for money. What they wanted to show was what people would do just based on their own grit and determination, and for their own purpose, their own reason. And that made this very, very unique.
Well, and if you can now look at now, maybe there's other big pieces of your past experience, and I know you're leveraging a lot of that to try to get this story of hope and inspiration and perseverance out to the world through speaking. But as you kind of look at those two experiences of the cancer and the wheel, what are your key takeaways? Like, obviously, there's impacts for you personally, but what have you learned about life through those things?
Yeah, well, there's just dozens of lessons that I
Yeah.
learned while I was out in the wheel. And the three main things that I like to focus on and to talk about, just because we have limited time when we're dealing with people, are the three main ones. And that is to take things one day at a time, to find things to be thankful for, and to find your purpose.
Hmm.
And those are huge lessons that I learned in surviving cancer, and then also while surviving out in the wheel. I took those lessons that I learned from cancer and applied them to this challenge in survival, and was successful because of it. There's no question about it.
So, how do you think the average Joe? So let's just pick one of those things for now. So, this idea of living one day at a time. I think, like you said, the cancer hits, and all of a sudden it puts a whole new perspective on things. And going through the wheel, the 60 days, and I watched a little bit of the video about it. Like, you almost had to take one day at a time. You couldn't think about, can I do this for 60 days, right? Can you have to take it one day at a time? So you're thrown in this, in both of these situations, there's sort of a reality of, I really do need to embrace one day at a time. How do you help people like me, or like maybe other people who haven't had that, forced upon them, where we say we want to live one day at a time, but we really don't have that outside force that's requiring that?
Interesting. Yeah, and that's difficult, because necessity is the mother of invention,
Yeah.
and until we're in that circumstance, in that situation, you're never truly going to arrive at that. That's why challenges and struggles and difficulties are very, very good for us. But the main thing that I entered this challenge fully believing that I could make it 60 days. I was rah rah, I can do this, I can make it, I can go, I'm going to be the guy that's going to make it 60 days. And that attitude lasted one entire day. That was it. By the end of the first day, I realized there was absolutely no way that I could make it 60 days.
Hmm.
And so I think we have to have that mindset for, once things get hard and once things get difficult, we have to revert to that mindset of saying, you know what? I know I need to break this down. I know that the problem in front of me is too overwhelming. It's too insurmountable. This mountain in front of me, I can't get over it. There's no possible way. And we say, no, I have to take it one step at a time. And I believe that's something you intellectually know. And then once you are in a situation where you are pushed beyond what you are capable of, we need to revert back to that type of thinking. And I think that's the biggest, most helpful thing that people can take from that.
And I think about the show like The Wheel, and I didn't see that when it first came out, but I saw Survivor for a little bit. I saw some of those other shows a little bit. I was never a big fan of the genre, but I was always sort of skeptical. Like,
Mhm.
okay, they film Survivor, and then at the end of the night, they all have a buffet dinner and kind of exchange laughs, and then they come on, and they film it again. And so, what is it like for The Wheel? I'm hearing you say, no, it was literally out in the survival, except for that 20 minutes where the crew came in and helped me move. I was really on my own. I mean, is that really true, or are you do you have a non-disclosure agreement that you've been forced to sign?
Right. Well, to start with, there are
Yeah,
non-disclosures that
I'm
they make
sure.
sign, but most of that all has to do with I can't tell anybody that I'm going on the show, and I can't tell anybody when I get back whether or not I won or lost until the show airs. So
Hmm.
that's really where they begin and end. So anybody that talks to you about it, the only non-disclosure that they still are under is what they do not want to reveal to you because of their own pride or their situation. So they're going to withhold things from you when they talk about their survival experience and not tell you about all the terrible things that happened, or what
Hmm.
they did, things like that. There are survival shows that are produced, and they are
Hmm.
heavily produced. And Survivor is one of those that's, very, very real. People out there are starving. It's really happening. But the drama, a lot of what you see
Hmm.
is not necessarily manufactured, but it's facilitated by
Right.
the production crew. The Wheel was very, very unique in that we had no producer telling us what to do, or
Mm.
never hinting, oh, go over there and look for a clue underneath that stump, and they also tell your other rival that it's also there.
Right.
That doesn't happen because we're all alone. 90% of what you see on the show I filmed myself. I
Hmm.
had 2 or 3 cameras running at all times, all day, and the crew that followed at a distance, that sometimes they'd be 200 yards away, they had no interaction with us. They weren't allowed to talk to us. They weren't allowed to help us. When they told me I had 20 minutes to pack, they would step back and film from a distance while I fumbled around trying to get my stuff. So they were there only to get the scenery shots. And it's really hard to film yourself when a jaguar jumps on you, and so they didn't want to miss that shot. So that was a main reason why they were there, just to get that one.
Now I didn't see that in a video. Was that one of your deals that happened?
Uh, I had jaguars prowling around my camp at night. They woke me up from a dead sleep by growling at me outside my campfire, and so they were there.
So
They were.
when you take 60 days of that intensity and you package it into a production like they did, now obviously they're going to make sure that they grab the dramatic parts. I mean, it's just good TV. I get that, but when you watch the show, do you feel like that was a fair representation of what you went through, or was it like they overblew it, or it was actually like they couldn't even capture the essence of how difficult that was? Like, how did you feel watching it?
Sure, it's impossible to totally capture the entire experience of what I went through. I believe that they did a very good job with the show. I'm very happy with my edit. As people will talk about, some people will say, "Oh, I got a bad edit." That's not how I
Mm,
actually am, and some of that's true. Some of that's not. You can follow anybody with a camera for 2 weeks and make them look like whatever you want. So there is a lot of creative license that they have, but I am very happy with how it ended up. They stayed very true to my story, and I was so very, very glad about that.
And one of the other things that you talked about was this idea of, okay, it's one day at a time, but also things to be thankful for. Now, was that, was that sort of as you're looking back on your experience on the wheel, or was there something like in the moment that you had to sort of find things to be grateful for?
No, that was a constant daily challenge that I dealt with.
And so, what did you
To,
find? Like, what? I mean, it seems hopeless, right? And you're the MacGyver apparently of northern Minnesota. But like, how did you find things to be grateful for or thankful for in the middle of all this?
that was difficult. It was a conscious decision. And it, again, arose from something that I knew intellectually. As a part of my spiritual journey through life, I've learned that a thankful person is a happy person. And a happy person is somebody that's able to keep going forward, right? Is motivated, is encouraged. And I realized out there right away that I need to keep my motivation up. I need to keep my encouragement up, because if I don't, I won't make it. I wouldn't make it very long at all. And so, I mean, there were extreme circumstances where I was in the tundra in Patagonia in Argentina, and I had been trapped into the shelter for 20 some hours while it was raining. When I first got there, just this lousy little shelter I had made quick just when I first arrived. And the water is running in underneath, and the wind is blowing, and my hands are wet, and my head is wet, and my feet are wet. And I was starting to lose it just slowly. And I was shivering, and I was shaking. I'd been in there for probably 12 hours already. I had no idea when this was going to let up. And I saw myself slowly start to lose it. And I thought, no, I got to find something to be thankful for. This is, I've been out there 40 days at this point, and I was like, I knew fundamentally that I needed to find something to be thankful for. So I stopped and just made a conscious effort to think of something to be thankful for. And after a few minutes of thinking, I realized, you know what? This little spot here on my chest is dry. One little spot. It's about the size of a quarter, but it's dry, and that spot's warm. And so I focused on that, and I was thankful for that tiny little warm spot that I had in the middle of my chest. And I focused on that for the next 8 hours as it continued to rain. And that's how you continue going.
Oh, it's so good. I'm thinking now about, all of these experiences you had, which are incredible experiences. We could spend 10 hours, I'm sure, just talking about your experience with that, and another 10 hours talking about your experience with cancer. And neither one of those even fully define who you are. Obviously, you've got family, you've got friends, you've got other experiences, all of these things. So as you look at, I guess, the entirety of your experience, these two things that we've talked about and everything else, and now saying, how can I give back to the world? What is, you said those three messages, but what do you feel like you have to offer the world in terms of, not just your experience, because people have experiences, but lack, getting insight from those. What do you feel like that insight is that you can bring to the world, the message that you can bring to the world that will inspire and motivate people to live better lives?
Well, I think just the idea of, again, taking it one day at a time, finding things to be thankful for, and finding your purpose. Those are very, very important things. And I think people don't understand the importance of them truly. Again, usually don't experience that until you've been in it. But a main overlying thing that I believe everybody can benefit from is the idea that you are so much stronger than you think you are. When you set your mind to something and when you set your goal, you never quit, you never give up. And that's that's something I said on day 60 when I left. And that has become my mantra. That's my personal quote that I go to. And, that's so important for people to understand, that we don't realize how soft we really are. After about 2 weeks after being back, I realized, wow, as I stood in front of the refrigerator with the door open, I was just looking at it. I was like, wow, we are incredibly soft. We are so much stronger than we think we are. And your brain is going to trick you, and it's going to try to tell you that the situation or the experience you're going through is just incredibly terrible, and you need to get out of it as soon as possible. If you're doing an athletic event, running or something, and your body's telling you, hey, dummy, quit what you're doing, that hurts. And the reality is we are so much stronger, and we can keep running so much further than we think we can. And there were many times while I was out there that my brain was telling me, hey, idiot, stop what you're doing, go home. And I had to say, no, I'm just trying to make excuses for myself. I'm just trying to find a way out. I will not quit, and I'll keep going on.
And that's, when you're in that situation, something I referred to earlier, when you're kind of in that situation, you don't have a choice. I mean, yeah, you could have pushed the button, you could have been done with the game, but, short of that, you don't have a choice but to persevere. Versus in our modern comfort world, at least for most of us, we have the ability to say, well, I don't need to push myself because I can, stop running. I can eat ho-hos or, whatever it might be. So how do we manufacture this? I mean, okay, how do we actually, when we realize that we actually could quit, we could actually eat more, it's all manufactured in our mind. How do we actually take that jump to apply these things that you've learned, these things that we aren't just, that we are stronger than we think we are? How do we actually apply that in situations where we don't have to be stronger? It's a choice.
Yeah, and that's a difficult challenge, and I see that in raising our kids, in that they don't have the hardships or the difficulties that I had when I was
Right.
growing up.
We talk about,
And
sorry to interrupt, we talk about that all the time in our parenting. Like,
yeah,
we grew up having to work and, not having a lot of money. And so you're kind of forced to all rally the troops. And now it's hard to manufacture that for our kids.
yeah, and I think you're on the right track when we look at manufacturing it, and I think we really do. And so I think it's a conscious effort that we have to make to find hardships. Just a little while ago, one of my oldest was mouthing off to his mother, and I said, you know what? He's just he's looking to challenge something. He's looking for something to push against. And I said, all right, I got something for you. And I brought him outside and made him dig a hole,
Mm-hmm.
and he loved it.
Yeah.
It was something he could work on. It was something he could accomplish. And at the end of the day, he showed me the hole when I got home from work, and he was proud of the hole he made. And he needed something to work on. They need work. They need challenge. They need hardship. They don't know it. And hardship and challenges and these experiences are nothing we want until we're through them, right? Until we're done with it.
Right.
But afterward, I wouldn't trade it for the world. And so, you're going to learn things intellectually, you're going to understand them intelligently, but then you're going to experience them. And it's only once you experience them could you actually really gain a lot from them and apply it later on in your life.
Right. But that is, like you said, that is the challenge. Like I look back at hardships in my life and like at that time, I would never want that. And there's some of them that I still wouldn't want today. But, you say, how did you get to where you are today? How did you become who you are? It is those hardships a lot of times.
Exactly. Yep. No, for sure. And I think um, I think we downplay some of the hardships that we had in our life and the good that came from them. Some of them are because maybe we got bitter about, my parents didn't provide this for me, and all my friends had, phones or something when they were this age, and I didn't, and I'm going to make sure that my kids do. Well, that's not necessarily the best thing for your kids. That's not necessarily the best thing for them to have, is to give them all the things you didn't have. They need some of those hardships to make them. I have a very interesting story. When I was a kid, I was with a friend, and he had moved down to Mississippi, and I was down there visiting. We went into a bait shop, and there were two old guys, the owner and his friend, were sitting at the counter talking. And when we came up to go buy bait, the friend got ready to leave, and he said to his friend, "Oh, we'll see you later. Take it easy." And he looked at both of us. I'd never seen this guy before in my life, and he said, "I hope the two of you have a rough life, because that's what makes real men." And he walked out the door, and I never saw him again. And I thought, well, that's really, well, thanks, I guess, but
Thanks. Yeah.
right. But that's, he understood something, in that it really does require hardship to bring us to this point of humility, of realizing where my limits really are and understanding that. And there's really no excuse or no substitute for it,
Yeah, one of the things that I've thought about, and I'm curious your take on this, is this idea of, is there a substitute for it? Because I tend to agree with you. It's hard to actually get there if you don't have the hardships. But I have friends who, had lives where they would say they never really had a hardship, but came out. They're still, positive members of the society. I'm curious what your take is on this idea of, can you substitute actually having the hardship if you have enough empathy for people that do have hardships? Like, that's the only thing I can think of that could be a substitute for actually having the hardship yourself, is if you can actually put yourself in a position to really understand what it's like to go through hardship.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that we can learn a lot of lessons from other people. Um, for me, most of the lessons that I learned that I didn't have to experience myself were watching, just for example, one of my brothers, and they were bad examples, or they're just things that that they went through that was hard, and they were the type of person that was just kicking against the stones all the time, and I learned a lot of really cheap lessons that way by watching them. So I think there's something to that, to learn from the bad examples around us and to learn the cheap lessons that way. But I like that idea also of looking at people and having empathy. And that is one thing that I learned a lot going through the cancer experience, is I learned empathy. That was not something I was very good at before.
Hmm.
And it took bringing me to my knees to learn empathy. And again, that is a way that we can learn cheap lessons. The best way to learn empathy is to go through it yourself.
Mm-hmm. I just know I've done work in Rwanda and some other humanitarian things, and I know, once you've been exposed to that level of poverty, you learn to appreciate, having clean water and
Right.
those sorts of things. So I never had to go through the hardship per se,
Mm-hmm.
but having the experience and allowing yourself to really be empathetic toward the people that have it and say, what would it be like to be in that situation? It does lead, I think, to more gratitude, um, than you otherwise would have had. In your case, you actually walked through what's it like to just be super hungry and have to find my own food. So you have that firsthand
Right.
experience. But I think even having walked through the experience of knowing, because your 60 days is going to end, right? I mean, that's
Right.
one of the things you
Yep.
knew at the end of 60 days, as hard as that was, it was going to be over. Some people
That's right.
live life not knowing that's going to be over.
Right. Exactly. And so that definitely adds a different element to it. I knew that my suffering was temporary, but it's you learn a lot of empathy when you go hungry for a while like that. That's
Mm-hmm.
for sure. So yeah, no, seeing and that's really just a big part of it is getting out there and seeing what the world has to offer and what people are going through, and you
Mm-hmm.
can really learn a lot about yourself, about what other people are dealing with, and how to respond to them, and learn from them for sure.
Yeah, I think that question I think what leads to empathy is sort of asking that question, what would that be like? And I think
Mm,
whether it's in the political realm, if think about the other side and say, what would it be like to believe that or to think that can create empathy, which can create a little bit more unity than we have now. In terms of your situation, what would it be like to be hungry? How would I feel? How would that change things? I think even asking just that question generally can create that empathy, which then can create, I guess, a greater sense of gratitude than you otherwise would have had. I want to shift gears a little bit to this idea of purpose. You mentioned that as sort of that third, leg of the pieces that you find the most important. What's your, I guess, what's your teaching? How do you help people? What's your message around how people can find purpose? So let's say we all agree that it'd be really important to have my purpose, but there's a lot of people that struggle with, but how? What's your
sure.
message there?
And so that's going to be very dependent on each person, and that's the difficult thing about this talk, is to apply this to everybody directly for them. When I give my talk, I tell my story, and people come up to me afterwards and they tell me things that they learned that I
Mm-hmm.
never would have thought about. And everybody is just so incredibly unique. So we need to talk about the truth. So we know that the truth is that we need to have our purpose. And I talk about how I found my purpose and I realized the importance of it. And everybody then will be introspective and can look into their own life and say, you know what? I don't have my purpose, or I see when I don't go through my purpose. Like right now, I mean, everybody's going through this quarantine type lockdown, and people are having a difficulty dealing with or finding their purpose, because some of what they've been working at their entire life, they've been pursuing, and now it's all gone. Their job is gone, and they don't have a lot of these things. So what I experienced out there, and this was a huge surprise to me, is that I realized that I would quit when it was easy before I'd quit when it was hard. And that was just shocking to me. If somebody had told me at the beginning of this that you would want to quit when it's easy before you quit when it was hard, I would have said they were crazy. I would have not believed that in the slightest. But when I was in the bush plains of Argentina, I was there for a total of 16 days. I had no idea how long I was going to be in any location, but this one happened to be 16. During my time there, it was hot in a dry desert area. I had a little tiny river nearby that I could scoop some water out of and do some fishing. And every day I spent 3 or 4 hours boiling water and collecting firewood, and boiling water and collecting firewood. And then I'd spend 5 or 6 hours fishing. And I ate really well. During the 16 days I was there, I caught a total of 77 fish. I was dubbed the best fed survivalist ever on any TV show. Some of these fish are like 16 inches long, so I had to represent Minnesota there,
Right,
and
right.
do the fishing, right?
Were they in the slot?
Sure. I ate every single one of them. So, so I was succeeding. I was doing really well. But I realized that I needed not just fire, water, shelter, and food, the four basics of life. In my hierarchy of needs, I needed a purpose. I needed something to give me satisfaction, to keep me going. And for me, I like building things. I like creating things. Working as a plumber my entire life in construction, and I have rental properties, remodeled those, and that gives me a lot of satisfaction. And I didn't realize this at the time, but in every zone I went to, I built a complicated shelter, except for the bush plains. I didn't need one there. It was dry and it rarely rained, so I had a very simple shelter that I didn't have to spend much work on. But I needed to find something to build. And so after a few days of realizing this and getting depressed, I started to make a chair. And I realized that, I was getting tired of sitting on this log. There was no back support. I'd made a chair in the Amazon, and I wanted to try a different style of making a chair. So I went and found these branches that were flexible, and I stripped them of their bark and threw them in the water to soak and soften them up. And I made a jig in the ground by pounding stakes in the ground into the shape of the parts I wanted. And for about 4 or 5 days, I worked on this chair. And at the end, I created the world's worst chair. It was absolutely terrible. When you sat in it, it was wobbly and rickety and teetery, but it gave me a purpose. It gave me something every single day to look forward to. I'd be boiling water and be working on this menial task, and I'd go fishing and I'd work on this, and I'd get the fish I needed, and I'd eat, and I'd say, I get to go work on my chair this afternoon. And it was something that I could look forward to as a goal, something that I liked doing, something that gave me purpose, and but was also over and above what the basic needs of survival are. And so people that are going through the mundane grind of the job need to find that purpose and work towards that as a goal. Going through my cancer treatment, I'm claustrophobic, and I had to go through these scans of an MRI machine and these different things. They put you in those small little tubes and put this big plate over your face. And there were times when they'd strap me down and I'd start to slowly freak out as they strapped me to this table. And I had to stop and I'd think, why am I doing this? I'm doing this for my kids. And I would picture my kids and I would think about them and say, this is why I'm doing it. This is why I'm doing it. And try to calm myself while I was going through these things. Without a purpose, we're going to quit. You're going to lose motivation. You're going to fizzle out, and you're going to quit very, very quickly.
That's so good. I'm curious, do you have that chair? Did they let you keep it? Did they bring it back for you at all?
No, unfortunately, part of the rules of the show were that in every location that I was at, I had to leave everything behind. So anything I made, I had to leave. And if I had found food, I had to eat it there, or I couldn't take it with me to the next spot.
I was just hoping maybe the producers or somebody grabbed that to give it to you after. Like, how great would that be to have that chair?
Yeah, no, I would have loved to have a lot of the things that I was out there with. Unfortunately, everything that I had, they either kept or destroyed when I moved from one zone to the next.
It'll be in the Discovery Channel Hall of Fame someday.
There you go. That's right.
You'll have your plaque, then right there with your bust. There'll be the chair. Well, I like this idea of having purpose, having purpose to sustain us. It sounds like, while you're, on the Amazon, while you're on the show, sort of, making shelter, the chair sort of provided those purpose. When you're going through all of your treatment and all of your testing, your kids are your purpose. So what now? I mean, you're on, hopefully forever, on the other side of cancer. You're on the other side of the show, and hopefully on the other end of any sort of survival necessity. What would you say is your purpose now?
Yeah, well, that's been interesting to try to find. I wanted to leverage my experience on this. I wanted to figure out how I could help people and what I could do. That was a big reason for me being on the show, is I wanted to show the world that there's life after cancer, that you don't have to quit. And so it's been a journey in itself to try to figure out how to best do that. And last year, I started, actually just about a year and a half ago or so, I started giving small talks at local Rotary clubs and different groups. Mm-hmm. And the people there said, you need to share this story. You need to get this out. You have a fantastic story that people need to hear. And so that gave me some encouragement to kind of move that direction. So last year, I kind of hit it a little harder, and I did around a dozen talks last year around the world. I actually went to London and spoke at an event there and all around the country. And the reception has just been tremendous. It's really been encouraging. And this year I was set to, project to do at least twice what I did last year. So it's been really encouraging to be able to do, and very, very rewarding.
Well, hopefully you can still do, some of them virtually, or they just get postponed and not canceled. I know as a speaker myself, it makes it tough when you're gaining momentum and then when that thing happens up. But also hopefully there'll be a pent up demand for that once things kind of free up a little bit.
Right. And it's required me, again, necessity is the mother of invention. And
right.
So it's causing me to think outside the box and try to find ways to help people now. And so I did small survival videos and put them on LinkedIn and on Facebook and YouTube, and did that for last week every day. And just little things like that to try to give some of these small clips of lessons that I learned out there that can help people today in what they're going through. And I think the more that we can make that applicable to people's everyday life, the better off they're going to be. Because it's really hard to say, okay, Luke was eating larvae in the Amazon. How does that relate to me? You know, Luke's out there stabbing alligators with a pointy stick at 3 o'clock in the morning. How does that translate to me? And it's really hard for me to make some of those connections. But as I said before, people come up and they say, that really meant something to me because I'm going through this. And I'm like, wow, my mind's just blown. I never would have guessed that that's the connection.
But somehow you connected with them.
The story is just seeing how the connection people make.
Yeah, somehow you connected them with them in a real way through your storytelling, and they feel heard. They feel like you know them. They feel like you have empathy toward them. And I think for a lot of people, that's that first step to healing. Just, I'm not alone in this thing. Even though, you were eating larvae and stabbing alligators, and they're going through trouble on their work and trouble with their kids, somehow there's that core undercurrent of, we understand each other. We understand struggle. We understand the lack of purpose in that.
Yeah. No, it's really been interesting. And I have one part where we talk about Helga. And Helga is the caiman that was about 8 feet long that would guard the water hole. And she would come and swim towards me whenever I get towards the water and bark at me with their bark and chase me away. And I ask people, who's your Helga?
Yeah.
And who's the Helga in your life that is standing between you and happiness, and try to make that connection. And it's been very encouraging.
That's real. I mean, that's the imagery that we all need. That is the connection point of saying, okay, yes, here was a real practical, I couldn't get water without dealing with Helga. What is it that you can't get without dealing with whatever your issue is? And I think, it gives people that imagery. Now you can, and that common language, right? What's your Helga? I love that. I'm curious, as you're on stage speaking, or when you're done speaking and, okay, Luke Soderling, and it was fantastic, and people are resonating, they're coming up after you, afterwards, talking to you, they email you, whatever it might be, sort of that positive feedback you get from a great experience. When you look at that and you say, I don't know what goes on in your mind, but there's this idea of, okay, I just impacted that room of people in some positive way. But what is it for you, and maybe tying to what your purpose is now as you're trying to figure that out? Like, what is that central emotion that you feel at the end of a positive event?
When I wrap up my event and the last few things that I'm talking about, it nearly brings me to tears every time. It is, I'm just so, I don't know, so freshly and so connected to it. It was 3 years ago, but I still feel like it was yesterday. And that I see that in other people when they come up to me afterwards. I see the tears in their eyes, and I see how real and harsh and terrible and upsetting and painful the experiences that they're going through. And we, for a moment, share those things. I was at one event where I was talking with a group of people, and I know that the person that was coming through had some severe medical issues, and they were in a wheelchair, had a headscarf on, and they just wheeled by. They weren't going to interrupt me for talking to these younger people I was with, but we made eye contact, and she nodded her head, and she had a tear in her eye, and we communicated more in that little glance than all of the people around me had for the last 5 minutes. And that is, you can't quantify that. It's really hard to nail down, but that is huge. And that really keeps me going and makes the hotel rooms and the flights and the time in airports and the time away from my family and all these things so worthwhile.
All of those glamorous parts of speaking that they don't put in the brochure, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Like,
nobody told me.
Oh, wouldn't that be fun to be a
Delayed
speaker? Right. Well, it is super fun to be a speaker. It is the engagement. That is super fun. But yeah, there's flight schedules. There's flights that get canceled, and there's waiting on the tarmac for 3 hours while the plane takes off, and there's missed connections. There's all of that joy that comes with it. Living out of a suitcase. Yeah, for sure.
Right. Every event you talk about, you have to leave the day before, and then you have the day of the event, and you probably leave the next day, and so you could have 72 hours.
Absolutely.
Invested into every event. And the high point of that is 1 hour.
Yeah.
There's 70, and you're talking and a little bit of time afterwards, maybe as you get to talk to people. So if you're lucky, you get an hour and a half. So you're talking about, another 71 hours that are invested in this.
Yeah.
You're away from your family, which is a huge thing to me. That's my purpose.
Yeah.
That's my main purpose, is to be with them. And I'm sacrificing time with my family to be able to do this, because I think that 1 hour is so important. Right.
Well, let's start to wrap up here, man. This is so good. Again, I've got a million questions I could ask you, but I want to honor the time and kind of the length of the podcast. But how do folks connect with you if they're saying, you know what, either I'd like to hear more about what he does, or you know what, we've got to talk. We need a speaker coming up here pretty soon that's going to connect with our audience in this sort of way. I'd like to ask Luke about that. What's the best way for folks to connect with you?
That'd be great. I direct people to my website. That's lukesoderling.com. You can find me on YouTube at Luke Soderling, on Facebook and Instagram at Luke Soder. And I'd love to connect with you there. I have a lot of videos on my website that really kind of bring you through parts of my talk for different audiences, and you get to see how people are laughing and they're crying, and it's very emotional, and it's a raw and a real story that really impacts and touches with people. I've talked to groups and audiences where they say, well, we know what they're going to be talking about for the next 2 weeks. And that's the reality, is that people are just, can you believe he did this and this? And I talked with one group that was of international salesmen, and some from India and China and Japan and France and all over the place. And after my talk, we sat around and we talked for 45 minutes, and they said, okay, so we're dealing with this trial. How do you translate that into what you dealt with? And these practical real world applications for people from different countries, completely different walks of life, with no real similarities to the way I grew up at all. These lessons and these truths, they transcended all of that. And so that's just been a fantastic part of this journey. And I would love to be able to connect with anybody that needs a speaker for that.
I love that idea of these super cultural truths that are just there. They're there all the time. They're there wherever you are. There is that truth. And I think you've touched on a lot of those already today. Well, I'll come back to you in a second, and you can kind of close us off with a quote or final thoughts, whatever it is. But guys, connect with Luke. I'll put the website in the show notes. If you have any trouble finding him, just reach out to me, and I will make that connection for you. But if you like what you're hearing, if you want to support what's happening here on the podcast with my writing, with my speaking, a few favors, I guess, that I would ask of you. Wherever you're listening to the podcast, if you could just like, rate, and review, that would be fantastic. Subscribe if you're interested in hearing all of the episodes. Connect with me on social media. You can go to stevefredlund.com. You can sign up for the newsletter. And if you want to support the show financially from a creative perspective, I do have a patreon.com/Steve Fredlund account, and you can support for as little as $1 a month and just kind of say, hey, man, way to go. Keep it going. Keep getting these great guests. That would be encouraging as well. But with that, let's get back to Luke. Luke, how would you like to close us off today?
And, if I could leave you with just one thing, and that is to never, ever give up. Life's going to be difficult. Life's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. It's going to knock you down. And it's going to be like when I was in the Amazon. I just got absolutely knocked down and didn't know which way to go. When you set your mind to something and when you set your goal, you never, ever give up. Don't give up. Don't ever, ever give up.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Luke Soderling. Thank you so much, Luke. That was awesome.
Hey, thanks, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity.